What if I told you the people who run from love are often the ones starving for connection the most? And what if the strongest attraction isn't beauty, money, or lust, but psychological safety, emotional mystery, and the feeling of being deeply understood? Today, you're going to discover 10 psychological turn-ons that hit avoidance harder than desire itself. These are the hidden triggers that break walls, create obsession, and awaken emotions most people never reach. Because when you understand the human mind, you stop chasing love and start becoming magnetic. Most people think avoidant people are afraid of commitment. That is not the truth. What they are really afraid of is emotional danger. They fear losing control. They fear being overwhelmed. They fear needing someone so deeply that it destroys the independence they worked their whole life to build. And if you do not understand this, you will misread every signal they give you. You will think distance means rejection. You will think silence means they do not care. But many times the opposite is true. The deeper the feeling becomes, the stronger their instinct is to protect themselves. Now listen carefully, because this changes everything. The greatest psychological turn-on for an avoidant person is not pressure, not seduction, not chasing, not emotional intensity. It is safety. Emotional safety. The feeling that they can exist around you without being judged, controlled, trapped, or emotionally suffocated. That feeling hits deeper than lust because it touches a part of them that almost nobody reaches. Most people walk into relationships carrying emotional demands. Text me more. Why are you distant? Prove you care. Tell me how you feel. And every time pressure rises, the avoidant mind begins to retreat. Why? Because pressure feels like danger. The moment they sense expectations closing in, their nervous system tells them to escape. Not because they are cold-hearted, but because survival patterns are running the show. But when someone enters their life with calm energy, confidence, patience, and emotional steadiness, something powerful happens. The walls begin to crack. For the first time, they feel like they can breathe. For the first time, connection does not feel like a threat. It feels like peace. And let me tell you something incredible about human psychology. People become deeply attached to the person who makes them feel emotionally safe, not temporarily excited, not superficially desired, safe.
Because safety allows authenticity.
When people feel safe, they stop performing. They stop pretending. They stop hiding behind independence, sarcasm, distance, or emotional control. And an avoidant person spends most of their life hiding vulnerability because vulnerability once felt dangerous to them. Somewhere in their past, they learned that closeness could lead to pain, disappointment, criticism, rejection, or loss of freedom. So they adapted. They became self-reliant. Why became emotionally guarded? They mastered the art of I'm fine. But deep inside, every human being still wants connection. That is why emotional safety becomes magnetic. It gives them permission to lower the armor they never wanted to wear in the first place. Now understand this. Emotional safety does not mean becoming weak, passive, or constantly available. That is not safety. That is losing yourself. True emotional safety comes from strength. It comes from emotional maturity. It comes from being grounded enough that you do not need to control another person to feel secure. When you can sit in uncertainty without panicking, you radiate power. When you can communicate honestly without emotional chaos, you radiate trust. When you can give someone space without turning cold, you radiate confidence. And confidence without pressure is irresistible. Most people destroy attraction because they react emotionally to fear. They chase harder when they feel distance. They demand reassurance. Rants when they feel uncertain. They try to force closeness because they are terrified of losing connection. But pressure never creates intimacy. It creates resistance. Think about it. Have you ever noticed how people open up naturally around calm individuals? around people who do not judge every word, around people who do not make every conversation emotionally heavy. That is because safety relaxes the nervous system. And when the nervous system relaxes, authenticity appears. This is why some people can create emotional impact without saying much at all. Their energy says, "You do not have to defend yourself here." That is rare. And rarity creates value. You see, lust can attract attention for a moment, but emotional safety creates emotional addiction. Because when someone spends their whole life feeling misunderstood, pressured, or emotionally unsafe, the person who finally understands their inner world becomes unforgettable. And here is the deeper truth most people miss: creating. Emotional safety is not just about helping another person heal, it transforms you too. Because to create safety, you must first become emotionally strong yourself. You must learn patience, self-control, presence, confidence. You must stop reacting from insecurity. You must stop needing constant validation. You must become centered within your own identity. That is real power. The strongest people in the world are not those who dominate others emotionally. The strongest people are those who make others feel calm in their presence. So, if you want deeper connection, stop trying to force people to open up. Stop chasing intensity. Stop believing love must feel chaotic to be real. Instead, become the kind of person whose energy communicates certainty, peace, and emotional freedom. Because when an avoidant person finally feels emotionally safe with you, something extraordinary happens. They stop running. They stop hiding. They begin revealing parts of themselves that the world rarely to see. And that level of trust is far more powerful than lust could ever be. Most people destroy attraction because they reveal everything too quickly. They over-explain. They over-text. They over-chase. They put their entire emotional world on the table before the other person has even had a chance to become curious. And then they wonder why the spark disappears. But attraction does not grow through overexposure. Attraction grows through emotional tension, curiosity, and mystery. Now understand this carefully. Mystery is not about playing games. It is not manipulation. It is not pretending to be someone you are not. Real mystery is depth. Real mystery is having a life, a purpose, a vision, and an identity so rich that people realize there is more to discover about you over time. And for avoidant personalities, this becomes one of the strongest psychological turn-ons imaginable. Why? Because avoidants are deeply sensitive to emotional pressure. The moment someone becomes only overwhelming, predictable, or dependent, their nervous system begins searching for escape routes. But mystery creates space. Mystery creates intrigue. Mystery allows attraction to breathe instead of suffocating under constant emotional demands. Think about human nature for a moment. People chase what stimulates their imagination. We are drawn toward what feels meaningful yet not fully understood. The human mind is wired to seek completion. When something feels unfinished, curiosity intensifies. That is why mystery creates emotional tension. It keeps the mind engaged. Most people are trying so hard to be chosen that they accidentally remove all intrigue. They constantly seek reassurance. They explain every feeling immediately. They make themselves emotionally available every second of the day. But when there is no uncertainty, no challenge, no emotional depth left to explore, attraction often weakens. Avoidants especially are attracted to people who feel emotionally self-containing. Not cold, not distant, but centered. People who have passions, goals, discipline, and purpose outside the relationship. Why? Because independence feels safe to them. It communicates, I want connection, but I do not need to control you to survive. That energy is magnetic. And let me tell you something powerful. The strongest presence in any room is usually the person who does not need the room's approval. That kind of energy creates mystery naturally. You have met people like this before. They walk into a room calm, grounded, focused. They are not trying to impress anyone, yet everyone notices them. Why? Because certainty is attractive. Purpose is attractive. Emotional self-control is attractive. And when someone cannot completely figure you out immediately, their mind keeps returning to you. Now, this does not mean becoming emotionally unavailable. Many people confuse mystery with emotional distance. That is not what creates healthy attraction. Real mystery comes from depth, not confusion. It comes from authenticity layered with self-respect. It means you reveal yourself gradually instead of dumping your entire emotional history onto someone in the first week, because value is often discovered in layers. Think about the most unforgettable people you have ever met. Usually, they were not the loudest. They were not constantly seeking attention. There was something beneath the surface, something calm yet powerful. The more you learned about them, the more interesting they became. That is the energy that pulls avoidants closer. Avoidants often spend their lives protecting themselves from emotional engulfment. So when they meet someone who respects space, maintains individuality, and still radiates warmth, it disrupts their expectations. Suddenly, connection no longer feels like imprisonment. It feels exciting, safe, free, and freedom is a massive psychological trigger for avoidant personalities. Most people think attraction is built through constant closeness, but sometimes attraction grows strongest in the spaces between interactions, in the pauses, in the moments where curiosity has room to expand. When someone walks away and still thinks about you hours later, that is emotional tension. That is psychological impact. You do not create that by constantly demanding attention. You create it by becoming deeply connected to your own life. When you are passionate about your mission, your growth, your future, your energy changes. You stop obsessing over whether someone texts back immediately. You stop shaping your personality around gaining approval. You become emotionally free. And emotionally free people are incredibly attractive because they make others feel free too. Here is what most people never realize. Desperation kills mystery. Neediness kills tension. But purpose amplifies both. When your life has meaning beyond another person's validation, you naturally become more magnetic. Your conversations carry depth. Your silence cunning, wise confidence. Your absence carries weight. And avoidants feel that deeply. Because beneath their emotional distance is often a longing for connection without pressure. They want closeness that does not erase individuality. They want intimacy that still allows breathing room. They want emotional depth without emotional chaos. Mystery creates that balance beautifully. It says, there is more to me than what you see right now. It invites discovery instead of demanding attention. And the truth is, human beings value what they continue discovering over time. When everything is instantly available, the emotional experience becomes flat. But when someone reveals themselves slowly through consistency, character, ambition, vulnerability, and quiet confidence, attachment deepens naturally. That is why mystery is not a trick. It is a lifestyle. It is the result of becoming so aligned with your purpose and identity that you stop trying to force attraction. You become fully engaged with
Life itself. And ironically, that is when people become most drawn to you. Because the most attractive people are not those screaming for attention. They are the ones living with depth, certainty, and quiet power that others cannot stop wanting to understand.
Most people believe attraction comes from getting approval. They spend their lives trying to be liked, accepted, chosen, validated. They change their personality to fit what others want. They become overly available. They tolerate disrespect. They chase attention as if attention equals worth. But the truth is, the more desperately someone needs validation, the weaker their presence becomes. And nowhere is this more obvious than with avoidant personalities. Avoidants are extremely sensitive to emotional dependency. The moment they feel someone's happiness depends entirely on them. Pressure rises inside their nervous system. They begin to feel trapped, controlled, responsible for emotions they cannot manage. And once that happens, distance begins to grow, but confidence without neediness creates the opposite effect. It creates attraction rooted in emotional strength instead of emotional hunger. Now understand this carefully. Confidence is not arrogance. Arrogance is loud insecurity pretending to be power. Real confidence is calm. It does not beg. It does not force. It does not need constant reassurance to survive. Confident people know who they are, even when nobody is clapping for them. That energy is rare, and rare energy always stands out. When someone is emotionally grounded, they bring peace into relationships instead of chaos. They do not panic every time communication changes. They do not lose their identity the moment attraction appears. They do not constantly seek proof that they are enough. Instead, they carry a quiet certainty that says, I value connection, but I also value myself. That is incredibly powerful because people are naturally drawn toward emotional stability, especially avoid them.
T.S. Most avoidants grew up learning that closeness could become emotionally overwhelming. Maybe love came with criticism.
Maybe vulnerability led to disappointment. Maybe emotional dependence felt unsafe. So as adults, they become cautious around intense emotional demands. They instinctively pull away from clinginess, desperation, and pressure because those energies feel dangerous to their nervous system. But confidence without neediness feels safe. It communicates emotional maturity. It says, I choose you, but I am not trying to possess you. And that changes everything. Think about the people who leave the strongest impression on others. Usually, they are not the people trying hardest to impress. They are the people deeply connected to their own purpose, standards, and self-respect. They know their worth without needing to announce it constantly. That kind of confidence creates emotional gravity. People can feel it. You can hear it in the way someone speaks calmly instead of running anxiously. You can see it in the way they handle uncertainty without emotional collapse. You can sense it in the way they maintain boundaries without guilt. Confidence is attractive because it creates trust. If someone cannot emotionally regulate themselves, relationships become unstable. One moment there is affection, the next moment panic, anger, insecurity, or emotional pressure. Over time, that instability becomes exhausting. But when someone remains grounded even during uncertainty, they become emotionally magnetic. Now let me tell you something most people never understand. Neediness is not love. Neediness is fear disguised as attachment. It is the fear of abandonment, the fear of not being enough, the fear of losing control, and fear changes behavior. People begin over-texting, over-explaining, over-giving, and over-sacrificing because they believe they must earn connection. But real attraction cannot grow in an atmosphere of emotional desperation. Attraction needs space. E, to breathe. Avoidance especially responds strongly to people who maintain their own identity inside relationships. Because independence feels emotionally safer than emotional dependency. When someone has their own mission, passions, friendships, discipline, and purpose, connection feels lighter and healthier. And here is the irony. When you stop making someone the center of your emotional survival, they often feel more drawn to you. Because now your attention becomes meaningful instead of automatic. Most people give away their emotional energy too freely. They become available every second. They abandon their standards to avoid rejection. But self-respect creates value. Boundaries create value. Emotional discipline creates value. Confidence says, I know my worth even if this relationship does not work out. That mindset changes your entire energy. Suddenly you stop chasing validation. You stop shrinking yourself for acceptance. You stop tolerating behavior that destroys your peace. And the moment you truly respect yourself, others feel it, especially avoidants. Because avoidants are often deeply observant. They may not always express emotions openly, but they notice energy. They notice emotional steadiness. They notice people who remain calm under pressure. They notice people who do not manipulate, cling, or emotionally collapse during difficult moments. That kind of grounded presence feels different to them. It creates curiosity instead of pressure, safety instead of obligation, desire instead of resistance, and confidence without neediness also transforms you internally. It frees you from emotional slavery. You stop depending on another person's attention to determine your value. You realize your worth is not defined by who stays or leaves. Your identity becomes rooted in character, growth, purpose, and self-mastery. That is true emotional freedom. And emotional freedom is one of the most attractive qualities a human being can possess. Because when someone no longer needs constant validation, they become authentic. Their kindness becomes genuine instead of strategic. Their affection becomes honest instead of desperate. Their presence becomes calming instead of draining. People trust that energy. People remember that energy. And avoidants are deeply affected by it because it removes the emotional pressure they fear most. So stop trying to convince people to choose you. Stop begging for reassurance. Stop sacrificing your dignity for temporary attention. Build a life so meaningful, disciplined, and purpose-driven that your confidence grows naturally from within. Because when someone truly knows their value, they stop chasing love from fear. And that is the moment their presence becomes unforgettable. Most people believe attraction is built through physical appearance, charm, or chemistry. And yes, those things can create excitement in the beginning. They can create sparks. They can create temporary obsession. But deep emotional attachment is built somewhere far more powerful in the human need to feel understood, not judged, not analyzed, not controlled, understood. And for avoidant personalities, this psychological turn-on can hit harder than almost anything else. Because avoidants spend much of their lives hiding behind emotional armor. They become experts at appearing independent, calm, detached, or self-sufficient. They learn how to avoid vulnerability because vulnerability once felt unsafe to them. Somewhere along the way, they discovered that opening up emotionally could lead to disappointment, rejection, criticism, pressure, or loss of freedom. So instead of expressing pain, they learned to suppress it. Instead of depending on others, they learn to depend on themselves. But here is the truth most people never see. Behind emotional distance is often emotional exhaustion. Avoidants are not emotionless. They are emotionally protected. And when someone finally sees beyond that protection without trying to force it open, something powerful happens inside them. Most people listen only to reply. They hear words, but they miss emotions. They rush to fix, advise, judge, or defend themselves instead of truly understanding another person's internal experience. That creates disconnection because people do not open up when they feel evaluated. They open up when they feel emotionally safe enough to be seen as they really are. Now imagine what happens when someone who's spent years hiding finally feels understood without pressure. Walls begin to lower, masks begin to fade, trust begins to grow naturally, and trust is one of the strongest emotional triggers for avoidance. Understand this deeply. Being understood creates emotional intimacy far beyond physical attraction. Physical attraction may capture attention, but emotional understanding captures the soul. When someone feels deeply understood, they experience relief. For the first time, they no longer feel alone inside their own mind. That feeling is unforgettable. Think about how rare true understanding actually is in today's world. Most conversations are shallow. Most people are distracted. Everyone wants to be heard, but very few people know how to truly listen. And because real understanding is rare, it becomes incredibly valuable, especially to someone who fears vulnerability. Avoidants often expect people to misunderstand them. They expect others to demand more than they can emotionally give. They expect pressure, criticism, or emotional chaos. So when they meet someone patient enough to understand their pace, their fears, and their inner world without trying to control it, it completely changes the emotional dynamic. Suddenly, connection feels safe instead of dangerous. That is a massive psychological shift. And here is what makes this even more powerful. Understanding does not mean agreeing with everything someone does. It means seeing the emotion underneath the behavior. Most people react only to actions. They see withdrawal and call it rejection. They see silence and call it indifference. They see distance and immediately take it personally. But emotionally intelligent people ask a different question. What pain might be hiding underneath this behavior? That question changes everything. Because many avoidants withdraw not because they feel nothing, but because they feel too much and do not know how to process it safely. Intense closeness can activate fear inside them. Fear of dependence, fear of losing control, fear of getting hurt. And when fear rises, their instinct is often distance. Now, most people respond to that distance emotionally. They panic. They chase harder. They demand reassurance. They react with anger or insecurity. But those reactions often increase the avoidant's desire to escape. Understanding creates the opposite effect. It creates calm. It creates emotional breathing room. It communicates, I see your fear without punishing you for. That kind of emotional maturity is rare, and rarity creates deep attraction. Because when someone feels emotionally understood, they stop feeling like they have to constantly defend themselves. They stop performing. They stop hiding pieces of who they are. And slowly they begin revealing parts of themselves they normally keep locked away from the world. That process builds emotional intimacy naturally, not forced intimacy. Real intimacy. And real intimacy grows through presence, patience, and understanding. You see, physical attraction fades in intensity over time if there is no emotional depth underneath it. But feeling deeply understood creates attachment that can last for years because it satisfies one of the deepest human needs. The need to be emotionally seen. Everyone wants to feel that someone understands the battles they never explain out loud. The fears, the loneliness, the emotional contradictions, the hidden pain. And when someone feels understood at level, they begin associating peace with your presence. That is powerful. Because human beings become emotionally attached to people who make them feel safe enough to be themselves. Now let me tell you something important. To truly understand others, you must first become emotionally aware yourself. You must learn patience. You must learn empathy. You must stop reacting from ego and start listening with presence. You must become strong enough emotionally to hear someone's truth without making everything about yourself. That takes maturity. But maturity creates depth, and depth creates real connection. So stop trying to impress people only with appearance, status, or words. Learn how to understand human emotion. Learn how to create conversations where people feel safe enough to remove their masks. Learn how to listen beyond behavior and hear the emotional reality underneath it. Because when someone who spent their whole life hiding finally feels deeply understood by you, they do not forget it. Not because you forced attraction, but because you gave them something most of the world never does. The freedom to be fully seen without fear. Most people believe love grows through constant pressure, constant texting, constant attention, constant emotional intensity. They think if they hold on tighter, love will feel stronger. But human psychology does not work that way, especially not with avoidant personalities. In fact, the harder you push for closeness, the faster an avoidant often feels the need to escape. Why? Because pressure creates resistance. The human mind naturally pulls away from anything that feels emotionally controlling, suffocating, or overwhelming. And avoidants are especially sensitive to this dynamic because freedom is deeply connected to their sense of emotional safety. The moment connection begins to feel like obligation instead of choice, their nervous system reacts defensively. But space creates something completely different. Space. Running creates curiosity. Space creates breathing room. Space allows attraction to grow naturally instead of being forced. And this is one of the most misunderstood psychological truths about relationships. Most people panic when they feel distance. They assume they are losing connection, so they chase harder. They demand reassurance. They over-communicate. They seek constant emotional certainty. But desperation rarely brings people closer. More often it overwhelms them, especially avoidants. Avoidants need emotional room to process feelings internally. Many of them did not grow up learning healthy emotional expression. Instead of talking through emotions immediately, they learned to withdraw, think privately, and regain emotional control alone. So when someone pressures them for instant emotional closeness, it often activates fear instead of intimacy. Now listen carefully because this changes everything. Giving space is not weakness. It is emotional confidence. Weakness says, I am. ED, constant reassurance, or I will collapse emotionally. Confidence says, I trust connection enough not to force it. That energy is incredibly powerful because when someone feels emotionally free around you, they stop associating you with pressure. Your presence becomes calming instead of exhausting. And human beings naturally move toward what feels emotionally peaceful. Think about it. Have you ever noticed how some people drain your energy because they constantly need attention, validation, or emotional management? Every interaction feels heavy. You feel responsible for their emotional stability. Over time, even affection starts feeling exhausting. Now compare that to someone grounded, patient, and emotionally secure. Someone who allows connection to flow naturally without control. Around that person, you feel relaxed. You feel trusted. You feel free to choose closeness instead of being forced into it. Freedom increases desire. That is human nature. People value what they are free to choose, and avoidants feel this more intensely than most. When someone respects their need for space without reacting emotionally, it creates safety. Suddenly, the relationship no longer feels like a trap. It feels balanced, healthy, voluntary. That changes the entire emotional experience for them. Now, this does not mean disappearing emotionally or pretending not to care. Some people misunderstand the idea of space and become cold, distant, or emotionally unavailable. That is not healthy space. That is emotional avoidance. Real space is different. Real space says, I care about you deeply, but I also respect your individuality. It means allowing moments of silence without panic, allowing independence without insecurity, allowing people to process emotions at their own pace instead of forcing immediate emotional intensity. And ironically, when people feel free, they often move closer naturally because desire grows strongest in environments without pressure. People unknowingly destroy attraction by trying to force certainty too quickly. They obsess over labels, constant communication, and emotional guarantees before emotional trust has fully developed. But connection is not something you force into existence. It is something you nurture patiently. Space allows anticipation to grow. It allows someone to miss your presence. It allows emotional tension to build naturally instead of being overwhelmed by constant contact. And emotional tension is essential for attraction. Think about music for a moment. What makes music powerful is not non-stop noise. It is rhythm, pauses, silence between notes. Without space, everything becomes overwhelming and loses emotional impact. Relationships work the same way. Healthy space creates emotional rhythm. It allows connection to breathe. And when avoidance experience connection without pressure, they often begin opening up more willingly because they no longer feel emotionally cornered. That is the part. Radox most people never understand. The more emotionally secure you become, the less you need to force closeness. And the less you force closeness, the more naturally intimacy can grow. This requires self-control. It requires emotional discipline, because your instinct may scream at you to chase certainty when fear appears. But emotionally mature people understand that fear-driven behavior often destroys the very connection they are trying to protect. Instead of reacting impulsively, they stay grounded. They trust timing. They trust energy. They trust that genuine connection cannot be forced through anxiety. And that calm confidence becomes deeply attractive, especially to avoidants who are constantly scanning relationships for signs of emotional pressure. When they meet someone who does not panic at every moment of distance, it feels different, safe, stable, mature. For once, they do not feel responsible for managing another person's emotional insecurity. That creates relief. And relief creates openness. You see, space is not the enemy of love. Unhealthy pressure is. Real connection grows where freedom exists. Real intimacy grows where people feel emotionally respected instead of emotionally controlled. And the strongest relationships are not built on obsession or constant reassurance. They are built on trust, individuality, emotional balance, and the confidence to allow connection to unfold naturally. So stop trying to force people closer through pressure. Stop believing love must feel emotionally chaotic to be meaningful. Learn the power of calm presence. Learn the strength of patience. Learn how to give space without losing your own center. Because when someone feels free around you, they stop running from connection. And that is when true desire begins to grow. The most powerful psychological turn-on is not beauty. It is not charm. It is not status, money, or smooth words. Those things may capture attention for a moment, but they do not create deep emotional impact on their own. What truly transforms attraction is growth, transformation. The energy of a person becoming stronger, wiser, more disciplined, more emotionally grounded, and more connected to purpose. Human beings are naturally drawn toward expansion. We admire people who rise above pain instead of becoming controlled by it. We feel inspired by those who transform struggle into strength. And for avoidant personalities, this becomes especially powerful because transformation signals emotional safety, stability, and depth qualities they quietly crave. Most people stay trapped in cycles of emotional reaction. They repeat the same patterns again and again. Same insecurities, same fears, same emotional chaos. They blame others for their unhappiness while refusing to evolve themselves. But growth changes energy, and energy changes attraction. When someone is genuinely transforming their life, you can feel it without them saying a word. There is clarity in their eyes, discipline in their habits, calmness in their presence, purpose in their direction. That kind of energy becomes magnetic because it communicates strength without arrogance. Now, understand something important. Avoidants are highly observant. Even when they appear emotionally distant, they notice emotional patterns deeply. They notice instability. They notice desperation. They notice emotional dependency. And they are often drawn toward people who feel emotionally grounded because grounded people create less pressure. Transformation creates groundedness because true growth forces you to confront yourself. It forces you to heal insecurity instead of projecting it onto others. It forces you to develop emotional discipline instead of reacting impulsively. It forces you to build self-worth from within instead of begging for validation externally. And when that happens, attraction becomes natural. You stop trying to be magnetic. You become magnetic. Most people are obsessed with. He's getting someone's attention, but transformed people focus on becoming someone they themselves respect. That shift changes everything. Because confidence built through growth is completely different from confidence built through ego. Ego says, "Look at me." Growth says, "I know who I am." One is performance, the other is power. And avoidants are often far more attracted to quiet power than emotional intensity. Why? Because emotional intensity can feel overwhelming and unpredictable, but transformation creates emotional steadiness. It creates maturity. It creates peace. And deep down, many avoidants are exhausted by emotional chaos, even if they struggle to admit it. Think about the people who leave lasting impressions on others. Usually, they are not the loudest people in the room. They are the people deeply connected to purpose. People who carry resilience in their energy because life tested them and they chose to grow instead of collapse. That resilience is deeply attractive, because it signals emotional safety. When someone transforms themselves, they stop seeking relationships to fill internal emptiness. Instead, relationships become an extension of an already meaningful life. That removes pressure. It removes desperation. And avoidance responds strongly to relationships that feel emotionally free rather than emotionally consuming. Transformation also creates emotional depth. A person who has faced pain, healed wounds, developed discipline, and built inner strength speaks differently. Their words carry weight because they were earned through experience. Their presence feels calmer because they learned how to regulate themselves internally. That kind of emotional mastery is rare, and rarity creates attraction. Most people remain controlled by emotion. They let fear determine their actions. They let rejection destroy their self-worth. They let loneliness push them into unhealthy attachment. But transformed people develop self-control. They learn patience, NCE. They learn how to stay centered even during uncertainty. And emotional certainty is incredibly attractive, especially to avoidants who are often hyper-aware of emotional instability in others. Now let me tell you the deeper truth behind all of this. Transformation inspires trust. People trust those who are actively growing because growth signals responsibility. It signals maturity. It signals that someone is not trapped in destructive cycles forever. And trust is one of the deepest emotional turn-ons possible because trust creates safety. Avoidants may resist emotional pressure, but they are still human. Deep down, they still want connection, understanding, peace, and emotional stability. They simply fear losing themselves inside unhealthy closeness. So when they meet someone who has transformed pain into wisdom and insecurity into strength, it changes how they experience attraction. Suddenly, connection feels healthier, calmer, safer, more mature. That is why purpose drive. And people often become unforgettable. Their life has direction beyond romance. They are building something, becoming something, growing into something greater. And growth creates momentum, psychological momentum that others can feel. You do not have to force attraction when your life radiates purpose, because purpose creates energy, and energy speaks louder than words. So stop obsessing over how to make someone choose you. Focus instead on becoming the strongest version of yourself emotionally, mentally, physically, and spiritually. Heal what is broken. Build discipline. Create goals. Develop emotional intelligence. Learn patience. Learn self-respect. Learn how to stand alone without becoming lonely. Because the most attractive force in the world is not someone chasing love desperately. It is someone transforming themselves so powerfully that their very presence inspires emotion in others. That is real magnetism, and no temporary lust can compete with it.